by an introduction of our guest speakers and some comments from them, followed by a Q&A session. Participants will be able to only use the Q&A box, so please put any questions that you have in this box. The University of Transdisciplinary Health Science and Technology, in short, TDU. We are a small private university based out of Bengaluru in Karnataka. And we have been a university since 2013, but we have been in existence as an NGO called the Foundation for the Revitalization of Local Health Traditions since the early 90s. The ethos of this organization was to preserve, document, and now as a university to educate and to research India's traditional knowledge systems. We have very consciously focused on Ayurveda in the last decade or so, but remain agnostic and welcome and study any type of Indian knowledge systems. And our university is very unique. We don't have your typical departments of electronics and engineering or humanities or biochemistry. We have very small niche centers. So in today's conversation, you will have Dr. Vishnu Prasad and myself, Megha, who belong to the Center for Ayurveda Biology and Holistic Nutrition. We have 6 other centers concerned around local health traditions, ethno-veterinary practices, conservation, clinical education, to name a few. If you'd like to know more about our university, please visit our website, www.tdu.edu.in. This program, the MSc Life Sciences Ayurveda Biology program, started last year. And our audience might wonder why we have chosen this title for this program. Because MSc Life Sciences exists as a postgraduate program, and Ayurveda Biology seems to be a new thing added on to it. Epistemologically, we believe that Ayurveda is nothing but life sciences, because it is Ayur, life, Veda, science. And it does not encompass just India's medical knowledge systems, but also a way of life. It's a philosophy. And just like in life sciences, where we study the breadth of biology, starting from molecular and cellular right up to species and ecology, similarly, Ayurveda too studies nature all around it in many different forms, right from the smallest, the shukshma, what you cannot see, to the gross and the big. And so we were motivated to start this degree because as many of us realized, and I'm trained as a biologist who's only been in started reading Ayurveda in the last 2 years, we realized that there doesn't exist any place in India where you could study both of these sciences together. And this we felt was a gap, a lacuna, because ultimately science moves forward when people can talk to each other, when their vocabularies match. If people talk about Vata, Pitta, and Kapha as my Vaidya scientists do, and I don't understand these phrases, then I go on and on talking about glucose, TCA cycle, and so forth. We are never going to be able to collaborate and have discussions that will take science forward. And so we thought we should have a course where we are not training people to become Ayurveda Vaidyas, but we are training them to have an appreciation for the language, an appreciation for the philosophy of both types of sciences, one that is thousands of years old and one that is a little bit more contemporary. And so our program has been designed as a 2-year full-time postgraduate program, because we also believe that one must have a very strong, rigorous grounding in at least one subject before attempting to understand another subject. And so we accept people with bachelor's degree in both traditional knowledge systems, the entire spectra of Ayush, as well as those of you who have completed degrees in biology and chemistry and their sub-genres such as biochemistry, molecular biology, human science, etc. This course is spread over 4 semesters. And I'll briefly tell you about the course. You can learn more about it on our website. We have 4 semesters in total. The first semester and the second semester is meant to give you a theoretical as well as practical hands-on experience on both aspects, the life sciences as well as Ayurveda biology. So in life sciences, we cover subjects such as molecular biology, biochemistry, and we start off with fundamentals of Ayurveda, local health traditions, and ecology, followed in semester 2 with medicinal plants, pharmacognosy, cell biology, and integrated immunology, which I have to share is a very interesting course that is taken by a Vaidya and Dr. Vishnu Prasad together, where they are trying to do one lecture after the other, one talking about Vyadika Shamatva and the other talking about T cells and B cells. Following this, in the third semester, we are preparing students to take on a dissertation project. So they will have immersion in research methodologies and also have a chance to take electives. Because TDU believes that knowledge comes from any source, our electives are very open. We encourage students to take any elective that they feel will help their career. It doesn't have to be only from the sciences. If a student feels that they want to do entrepreneurship and wants a business elective, they're welcome to do that thanks to the MOOC courses that are available in the NPTEL portal. And also, TDU has many different partners. We partner with research institutions like NCBS. We also partner with design schools such as Shrishti and Kalaripaitu, a dance school. And so we encourage students to look across our partners and pick electives that best suit them, followed by an entire semester that is dedicated to a research project. For those of you who are from a clinical background and wish to do clinical sciences, we have a 100-bed hospital that is right across from our university where clinical projects can be supported. Students often ask us, what will I do at the end of this course? And we feel that this course prepares them to become innovators, and innovators in very different areas, such as discovering new biology. So those of you who are interested in doing a PhD will find that the curriculum nicely dovetails with the examinations for CSIR, DBT, etc., to go on to do a PhD in any institute in India. Second, for those of you who are interested in product development, who want to start their own company perhaps, or are interested in making foods, making formulations, researching on drugs, all of these activities will be supported by the kind of curriculum that we have designed. And those of you who have a clinical background and wish to continue to do science but in a clinical setup, you will find that your skill sets will allow you to develop, understand, and perhaps implement new methods in health and disease understanding as well as management. I'm very happy to share that we finally launched our admissions portal, and we are now accepting applications to this program right up till 30th May. You can learn more about our admissions process online. With that, I stop about TDU and our MSc Life Sciences program and switch gears to introduce our guests today. We have 2 people from very different backgrounds with us today, and I'm very, very happy that they agreed to come on together for this particular program. Professor Subhash Lakhotia is somebody that I consider a mentor. He's an eminent fly biologist, and he's had a career that has spanned 40 years. And what's really unique about Professor Lakhotia is that not only has he excelled in research, and his lab has made some wonderful contributions to long non-coding RNAs, but he's also been a champion of science and community, how scientists have a role to play in shaping opinions, and he has led by example to tell us that we should not be head down only looking at things that are under the microscope, but understand the society around us, and take everybody forward together. He's currently a Serb distinguished professor at the Department of Zoology. About a decade ago, or maybe a little before that, Professor Valyathan's group started the Ayurvedic Biology Task Force. And Professor Lakhotia was one amongst the scientists who joined him in trying to understand Ayurveda biology precepts. It must be noted, it is not validation, but to understand the precepts that underlie Ayurveda. And Professor Lakhotia's lab used Drosophila, the fruit fly, to uncover a couple of questions regarding rasayanas, the Amalaki Rasayana and the Rasa Sindur. And maybe he will talk a little bit more about his work today. Professor Kishor Patwardhan, he is a professor at Banaras Hindu University in Kriyashala, and he is a teacher and researcher. He teaches in Ayurveda physiology. I have been acquainted with him mostly through social media. But I must say, just like Professor Lakhotia, Professor Patwardhan also believes that being engaged with the community and taking science forward together is very important. That we cannot live in silos, we must constantly talk to each other. And this is an example of a webinar of two scientists who have spoken to each other, one who is trained in Ayurveda and another who is trained in classical genetics, to come together and ask questions that will move science forward. Professor Patwardhan is also in charge of the Ayurveda Network. It's a wonderful series of uh, seminars, which is very accessible to even people like me who don't know anything about Ayurveda. And he sits in several committees, scientific advisory committees, and ethics committees. So I will talk briefly about the paper that prompted me to invite both these scientists today. And this is a paper that they have put out in bioRxiv. It's not yet peer reviewed, but it's a paper that talks about Saraswat Ghrita and Kalanayaka Ghrita. So Ghritas are quite popular for treatment of cognitive impairments and neurodegeneration disease. And you might be wondering, how is it possible that something like this can be studied in a fly that sits on your banana? And I'm sure most of you must have experienced Drosophila melanogaster as it has sat in your fruit basket. Now, there are two diseases that this paper has sought to look at, and that's Alzheimer's disease and Huntington disease. Clinicians in this audience might wonder, how can you model Alzheimer's disease, which is a progressive neurodegenerative disorder? There's loss of memory, dementia, or even Huntington's, right? Similarly, in a fly that is so small that you can't even see it on this particular banana. And a genetist like Professor Lakhotia will tell you that this is possible because we have engineered the fly to produce molecular signatures that we find in clinical samples that replicate or are associated with the disease. So in this case, Alzheimer's disease is associated with the accumulation of this peptide called A beta 42, whereas Huntington's disease is manifested because of this long repeat of amino acids called the polyQ set. And we can genetically engineer a fly to make these aberrant proteins and make lots of these aberrant proteins so that it starts to show phenotypes or features that are similar to such disease. And it's easy for us to feed these to the fly because, as you can see, fly media consists of food that we make in a pressure cooker that we feed, put in these vials, and then you just drop the flies into this vial and they'll eat whatever you give them. So in this particular experimental setup, Saraswat Ghrita and Kalanayaka Ghrita were fed to these flies at varying dosages. I will just show you one figure from this paper to illustrate the potential of this approach. So you will see on top here is a part of the eye in the fly. And these green dots or green speckles is an accumulation of polyQ in the fly. So in the diseased conditions, you find a lot of accumulation of this protein. Whereas in flies that have been fed the two Ghritas, you can see the number of green dots is highly reduced. And you can also see that the structure of the eye reverts to what is more normal. This paper also goes on to look at longevity and other developmental features, which I won't talk about. I've included a link to this paper down below, and I would encourage you all to read this paper if you're interested. Now, I will invite Professor Lakhotia and Professor Kishor to share their remarks on why they think that Ayurveda biology is necessary, if at all.
Great. Thanks, Megha, for very nicely presenting what your institution does and what is the objective of this new course that you have done, and also telling us what we do. That's fine. Thanks. But the point is that, you see, Ayurvedic biology, as you said, is actually life science. What has happened in our partition kind of education system, that we separated biology from Ayurveda. And Ayurveda became more of a ritualistic process. And I'm sorry, I use some very strong words, but not that I'm questioning the philosophy of Ayurveda, but the way it is practiced is where my worry is. And this whole 3,000 or 4,000 or whatever number of years that has gone by to make this health practice, we have never tried to look at how does it work. Number one, does it work? We believe it works. How does it work and why it works? And these are important issues, not only for patients, but also for those who try to treat the patients, take care of their health and so on. And this is where Ayurvedic biology, as you said, Professor Vajayathan, started. And the objective was that we try to understand whys and hows that underlie this. And I, being a Drosophila researcher for more than 50 years now, I thought that we can use Drosophila as a good model. Obviously, I remember in 2007 when I proposed this, there were very serious questions raised by Ayurveda, especially that how can you talk of Vata, Pitta, Kapha in a fly? We cannot. But what I tried to explain to them that it has enormous genetics, enormous powerful methods, techniques to manipulate its genotype to do what we want. And this is what, as you showed our example from our paper, that we can make these flies produce human proteins, apparent proteins, normal proteins, and we can make them express when we want. And this is where the power comes in. And then we can follow it step by step. And so my interest in doing this is not to develop new drugs, not to validate drugs, but just to understand how does it work. A given formulation, how does it really work? What are the cellular and molecular events that happen? And in the process, maybe I'll talk about it later, we stumbled upon this neurodegeneration models to try on this. And maybe I'll talk about that a little later. But the exercise that is being done, I think students who are participating and whom we wish to train must start this whole thing with an unbiased, open questioning mind. That what we are trying to look at is neither question Ayurveda nor to prove Ayurvedic things. It's just like, okay, we ask, is it true? Is it so? If so, how does it work? And I think that's the approach that I would like to take, and any researcher who gets into this field, to be absolutely unbiased. And we need people who know Ayurveda, who understand the Ayurvedic philosophy, Ayurvedic principles, and people who know modern biology. And it's a synthesis between them, which I believe your course aims to achieve, should be the one that should lead to a better understanding and appreciation. We may have to get rid of many of the myths, many of the dogma that have gone along, have become kind of part and parcel of Ayurvedic practices today. We may have to get rid of them and embrace what we can understand in a good scientific temper and with an unbiased mind. That's what I will stop now, and maybe Professor Kishor Patwardhan will can like to make some comments.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Megha, and thank you, TDU, for giving me this opportunity. And I'm extremely happy to be a part of this webinar with my mentor, whom I consider as mentor, Professor Lakhotia sir. Actually, my interaction with his department and the biology as such started long ago. When I mean, BHU is a university which provides a unique model where you have got several interdisciplinary works that are going on, and within a campus you have got so many different departments, and there are several platforms where you come into touch and you come I mean, you have to interact with so many people across the university. And that is how once I happened to listen to Dr. Lakhotia's lecture in one of those conferences or seminars, and then we started interacting. And one of my students, I asked her to work with Lakhotia sir in his lab, and that is how the things got moving. And it has been a very exciting journey all through. And I think this Ayurveda biology course that you are talking, program that you are talking, is really very, very interesting. Not only interesting, rather it is essential. It should have been there long back. I mean, it is too late that it has come up. Basically, what happens is with Ayurveda, once a student gets into BAMS and then MD, it is almost a kind of dead end, because there is no way other than Ayurveda to progress forward. Especially once a student comes into BAMS, then there is no way of getting into mainstream sciences. So I think this is the unique feature of your program, where people from mainstream science can join, can learn Ayurveda, and even Ayurveda graduates can learn mainstream sciences. Because in Ayurvedic colleges, even in post-graduation, introduction to current biology, maybe even physiology, biochemistry, molecular biology, genetics, these are the subjects that are not taught actually. I mean, though they are there, some of these are there in the curricula, but all of them are being taught by those who are not trained in these subjects. So this has been a concern that I have been voicing since last, I mean, about 20 years or so. I have been working on Ayurvedic education, and this has been a major concern that I have been voicing. And I think the courses such as this one will be able to fill this very, very important gap. And that is where scientists can come into touch with Ayurvedic experts, and Ayurvedists can come into touch with modern scientists and exchange their ideas. And that is where that is what is very important actually. Otherwise, there is, I mean, in the Indian education system, multidisciplinarity is something that is a very, 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 very weak link. But I think these types of courses will help filling this gap. And I was there with FRLST and TDU. I was associated with the institution for long. Even I got my Vaidya Scientist fellowship done in your university, and I know how the environment there is so conducive and so encouraging. And I think this is something that people should make use of, especially the young researchers. And one more point I would like to say, that, for example, in modern medicine, you have got basic sciences to support them, to supply them with the information and many, many materials. Molecular biologists are there, geneticists are there, biochemists are there. They keep they function, they perform the function of maybe you can call it as a foundation on which the entire biomedicine structure is working. But unfortunately for Ayurveda, we don't have any such sort of thing. Where from we don't get research inputs, newer ideas, because once a person gets into Ayurveda, he gets stuck with practice and so many dilemmas, and he's unable to focus on research. So if such a dedicated cadre that can cater to the needs of research and that can provide innovative, even questions for that matter, so that they could be worked upon. So this kind of a cadre was lacking since long, and And I think this is what is being fulfilled with this endeavor. And I really, really am happy and excited to be witnessing this progress. I was there as a part of board of studies also while framing the curriculum of this program. So I know the inner things that have gone into it. So yeah, that is what I would like to say.
And
As a
now that
Because,
the pandemic has
because
ended, we'd like to have you back probably on campus. Go ahead, Professor Lakhotia.
just one comment. Actually, we had suggested a BSc course in Ayurvedic biology way back in 90s. But unfortunately, it didn't work out. I mean, the whole idea was that yes, Ayurveda should be understood in terms of biology as we know today. But there are wheels within wheels, and things didn't work out. So I'm glad that this has started, and they should really go in a very logical and with, as I said, open mind, so the student really learn. And as Professor Patwardhan said, that you see, learning about Ayurveda without knowing biology is really, to me, dangerous. Yes.
Yeah, I'll give an example to our audience. So we do this Ayurveda dietetics course, and we talk about Madhura Rasa. Now, it's very easy for me to talk about taste from a biochemistry point of view, because sugar, bitter have taste receptors. Salt and acid, they work on channels, ion channels. But when we start talking about Madhura Rasa, Kashaya Rasa, and we say that they have, you can experience them absolutely, and as an individual you can intuitively understand them, but we can't go back and say, this is the molecular biology, or this is the biochemistry that underlies this particular rasa. And it's quite frustrating sometimes, but this is exactly what Professor Patwardhan, I think, wanted to say, that we cannot go back. And also in our shastras, there is no how to. They don't tell you how they arrived at a conclusion. It's very, this is it. And many of these are very intuitive. So if you would like to believe it from an intuitive point of view, you can, but you can't go back and investigate it and say, okay, this is how they arrived at it. Okay, so we had a few questions for our guests, and I welcome our audience to start asking questions as well. In the meantime, I will ask them a question, which is also regard to the paper that you both have co-authored. And that is, do you think that we can learn things from doing Ayurveda biology on animals, on model animals?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Professor Lakhotia.
No. You wanted to say something more?
No, first you, and then Dr.
Okay. See, the point is, one thing we must understand: life follows same principles across all organisms. Be it virus, be it bacteria, be it plants, be it animals, be it humans, basic processes are same. Equally important is, now that we know the genomic structure, we know the genetic structure, we know the whole thing. Drosophila, the model organ that I work with, and thousands of people across the world work on this, shares almost 60 to 70% of genes with humans that are involved in diseases, particularly. I mean, actually, you can change the human disease with Drosophila disease, gene, and Drosophila gene with human disease, and you'll get a given situation. So they are workable. And this then means that we can try to model in the fly all kinds of conditions. I mean, on one hand, it has been used for really learning about how we develop, or what are the program that goes on, how genes express, how do we respond to certain stresses and behavior and memory and so on. But for human disease now, actually today, you name a human disease and there's a model in Drosophila. You have a model for diabetes, you have a model for obesity, you have a model for lack of hunger, you have a model for aging, you have a model for cancers. Like I also work on cancer, several different kinds of cancers. So there are models where you can induce blood cancer, you can do epithelial cancer, you can work on the urinary system, the iron balance, immunity. So and that's where we thought we can do this. And you see, like for example, this talk about neurodegeneration. How did it happen? This was one of the very interesting things. We started the Amlik Rasan and Rasindur. I took two of these formulations. One because of my interest in and the stress response. So heavy metals cause cell stress, and amlic rasayan is an antioxidant and general these things. So we wanted to see what it does in Drosophila, what kind of genes are activated, how does it happen. And while doing this, we came across that both of them, when fed into Drosophila, activate certain pathways which are also known to suppress neurodegeneration. I mean, this because I've been also working on neurodegeneration from genetic point of view, just as a molecular biologist. So I knew the pathways. And so it was, just like, okay, let's try, let's see if it works. There was no a priori reason that why should I try amlic rasayan on neurodegeneration, and we just tried. And the results were really remarkable. That in both cases, and especially with Rasindur, Huntington's was almost completely suppressed. And this is then led in, and then when Prof Patwardhan wanted one of his students to do this, then we thought, oh, let's go to some other rasayanas, and we consulted Ayurvedic experts, and this is a number of them, and that's how it worked. And I think this is what has to be the important point, that as a scientist, we have certain understanding of basic biology, basic question gene programs. And as Ayurvedic practitioner, you have, okay, this is the disease that affects this part, and how we can. And so when we connect together, when you bring these different kinds of brains together, things really work out. And I think that's what Ayurveda really needs today. It should not remain confined to Ayush experts alone, because as Professor Patwardhan said, they're not really trained in science, they're not really trained in biology as such. If you keep on talking about biology and physiology, what is there in Charak Samhita, Shusha Samhita, we are going to be in a disastrous state. And that's what we need to change. That's one of the things that I would say.
I'd like to invite Professor Patwardhan to comment now, and I'd like to just have your sort of personal perspective, because you did not train in either mice or fish or any such organisms. What made you feel that, okay, this is a system that we can work with?
Basically, I am an academician and not a clinician. So my interest has always been in theoretical biology and sort of things, right? So I wanted to see whether this model that was established to be of help. So whether we can use this to investigate some more formulations, because we had already decided that isolating one single component and active principle and doing that work will not, of course, it will be of help, but it will not nurture Ayurveda as such. So for nurturing Ayurveda, or at least test Ayurveda, what is happening with the formulations that are actually in practice. So whether their actions can be understood through these models or not. Then I consulted Lakhotia, then he happily agreed to perform these experiments. That is how it started. But I would like to say that actually using animal models is fine as long as academic interests are concerned, or maybe even safety, efficacy studies, or even mechanism of action or toxicity, fine. But when it comes to a higher level of evidence, then you have to go for evidence pyramid meta-analysis, RTC or meta-analysis and so on and so forth. So that the animal studies will not be the substitutes for human trials. And we have seen, for example, the thalidomide tragedy. Nobody was able to abort that tragedy, even though the thalidomide was tried in so many kinds of animal models. It was tried and it was found to be safe. And many reports were there saying that they were unable to find out any toxic dose that could produce any toxicity in those animals. But still, when it came into clinical practice, we know what tragedy it led to. So many, children were born without limbs and so on and so forth. That tragedy is a nightmare. So extrapolating the information that is got or that is derived from animals directly into human beings is something that should be very, very carefully done. So one has to have this understanding of the differences between animal models and human models, and the importance of using human clinical trials when it comes to clinical efficacy and effectiveness rather. So these are the 2 points that I wanted to make. Yeah. Sir,
Go
I
ahead,
think
sir. You're muted.
you are muted, sir.
Kishor Patwardhan said, see, absolutely human trials are needed, but the possibilities are indicated through animal experimentation. We can't directly go and examine the human patient directly because that's unethical and not really necessary when we have these models. The thalidomide tragedy, I think, was partly the commercial interest that came in. See, much of this drug industry, pharma industry, we get lots of things happening unethically, unfortunately. And this was one such example. There were reports that there is a danger, but then the pharma industry, which has spent, and during COVID time, we have seen so many cases happening. Even in great journals, publish some paper, and within 6 days, the paper is retracted, and so on. So this is something that we must understand. I would say animal experiments are necessary. They can be very powerful. They can show the path in which direction to look for. For example, I think till we saw that these gains suppress neurodegeneration like they do, I don't think an Ayurvedic practitioner would have tried to say, okay, let's try Rasindur on Huntington's or disease or something. These open new paths, and that's what has to be then followed up by Ayurvedic practitioners and do appropriate clinical trials, and which is something that is missing in Ayurveda. Real clinical trials are missing, and I think students who get trained in the methods of science and who understand this should be able to better appreciate the need for such practices.
And actually, that comes to a question we had for you, Dr. Patwardhan, first, is about clinical trials and evidence-based medicine. I mean, this is the buzzword right now. But many times, at least limited conversations that I have with our Vaidyas is that Ayurveda is personalized. We can't, put it on the same framework as an RCT because we don't consider every individual to be a homogeneous expression of genetic character. Everybody's heterogeneous, and so we can't put our Ayurvedic principles on the same framework as a regular RCT. So what are your thoughts on evidence-based medicine and how should we embrace that?
Yeah, thank you for asking this question. Of course, a contentious issue which has been dealt with so much of hesitancy. But I would like to say that the evidence as accepted in the current standard should be also applicable to Ayurveda. If you want to make Ayurveda a real science, then whatever methods are applicable in science, they should be applicable in Ayurveda also. So this is one important thing that Ayurvedic Vaidyas, they hesitate to admit. And basically, this individualization is something that is sometimes overhyped. Though, in principle, yes, Purusham Viksha, this is what we say, right? Each individual is different. We take into consideration dosham, balam, kalam, analam, prakritim, vaya, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to actual practice, does this individualization happen as it should have happened? Possibly no. If you screen the different prescriptions of the same Vaidya for same disease, in most of the times, the repetitions are seen. And individualization happens in modern medicine also. This is what we often ignore. If a person is suffering from hypertension, diabetes, kidney disease, and so on and so forth, there are specific indications and contraindications for drugs. Right? Some antihypertensives should not be given if a person is diabetic. Some antihypertensives should not be given if the person is having kidney diseases. So some sort of individualization happens even in modern medicine. But still, they are able to do the trials and able to do meta-analysis and so on. See, RCT is, of course, maybe a bit difficult, especially when it comes to Panchakarma. because blinding is not possible. See, there I agree that yes, we have got some limitations. You cannot do double-blind randomized control trial with panchakarma when you are giving some basti or vamana. You cannot have blinding. But when it comes to prescription-based or formulation-based prescriptions, then some amount of this random control trials are possible, especially the one that has been reported by Ram Manohar and his team in rheumatoid arthritis, how they managed to evolve placebos, and then even after that, how were they able to retain individualization. This is something that has to be taken as a template. But unfortunately, even after 10 or 15 years of that trial having been published, no efforts have been there to replicate similar studies or to modify or improvise upon those studies, because that study has got some limitations, because it cannot be reproduced because it is rather it evaluates the efficacy of a physician who was able to individualize the therapy better. But if you ask other physician to reproduce the same therapy, the paper doesn't describe that. So external validation is something that has to be brought in. Okay, any science grows with such mistakes, so or maybe lacunae. So those lacunae have to be filled. Now there has to be some effort to look into those aspects and improve upon. But none of those efforts have seen. This is something that is of great concern. And if I have been saying this repeatedly, that if the complex interventions cannot be subjected to this, what you say, RCTs, then there is always an option to go for longitudinal observation studies. Many good results have been got through observation studies. See, the relationship between smoking and lung cancer. I cannot divide a population or sample into two groups and ask one group to smoke continuously 10 cigarettes per day for next 10 years, so that I want to see whether how many of you develop lung cancer. See, it is not ethical. So they identified 40,000 doctors in UK. So British doctors study, it was a huge study which went on for 50 years. And they could establish that yes, the smoking is definitely associated, and it is rather they established the causal relationship between smoking and lung cancer. So underestimating the observational studies is something that one should again relook into. So they're very powerful. There are many, even Framingham heart study, for example. Whatever we know about the cardiovascular diseases, like maybe the effect of smoking, the gender differences, effect of physical activity, all this was established using only one single observational study that was pursued some 50 or 60 years ago, and still it is going on. See, this is how we can plan some studies. The practice-based evidence is something that is very, very important. We can document whatever is happening. We can just start documenting whatever is happening in clinical practice, and then maybe in 5 years or 10 years of time from now, we will have a lot of evidence which will say, yes, this works and this does not work. This has to be done. Yes, sir wants to say something. Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
I think that what has been stated is really true, but I'll add something more. That yes, I think Ayurveda has been based on, if we take Chara Sanghita, it's essentially, we do not know whether they did any experiments or they didn't do any experiments, but obviously there were keen observations, long-time observations, which were distilled into certain principles and certain practices and so on, and which have been carried on. But what we need to do is, yes, longitudinal studies, observational studies are a must. But even, let's say we take case of lung cancer, we take of heart diseases, they were backed up by experimental studies on animals, on cell cultures. That yes, if you give nicotine, you give cigarette extracts, you get chromosome aberrations, you get certain things. So you know, we need to put things together. Observation studies, actually everywhere there, over the years, why do we talk of experience? That's an observation study, that somebody who has been practicing for 50 years is expected to do much better than somebody who has just started because of the experience, because of the observations. But unfortunately, what has happened is somehow we didn't develop the practice of recording our observations in a systematic manner. And therefore, the person's experience goes away with that person. They do not get transmitted to the next generation of practitioners. And this is where when we talk of clinical trial, what we are trying to think of is systematic recording of observations under certain principles. And I think that must be a part of the training of Ayurvedic doctors also, as to how it should be done and and then animal experiments are not the only answer. They only provide certain whys and woos and how, but which can give you new direction to look at what may work, and maybe we can improvise. And the other thing, of course, I must also say, because this is what Kishor also alluded to, that many people who talk that they are doing Ayurvedic science work on active principles. And let's understand, Ayurveda is not active principle. Ayurveda is a holistic, complex mixture of things, each one trying to put in the balance. Because if you look at the genesis of allopathy, it was based on taking these herbs, finding out the active principles, and then hoping that this will work better. And that's how allopathy started. But Ayurveda, and this is the advantage, we can take pride, but when we take pride, we must not just stand on the shoulders of our great-grandparents. we must learn things ourselves and modify, because knowledge cannot be stagnant. Knowledge keeps on improving. When you mentioned non-coding RNA that I've been working on, well, till 2000, non-coding RNA was a junk, useless thing. Nobody should work on it. And today, everything is non-coding RNA. So within 2 decades, if things can change so much, our understanding can change so much. What we're talking about 3,000 years. Things have changed, and we need to keep track with that change. That's what, only when that happens, the traditional health system will really be of service to humanity.
So no questions here, so I get you both all to myself. I want to ask you a question as mentors. Both of you have had students, you have sent them out to the other side in a way. And that's what we're also trying to do. We have students who are interested, who are coming from different sciences, and then we're sending them out there. But there are challenges, and these challenges are to do with perceptions. So given your experience training these students, presenting your work, talking to colleagues within your own field, what sort of advice do you have for students who want to do Ayurveda biology or try to understand Ayurvedic precepts using modern biology? As mentors, what advice would you give them?
Okay, well, the first issue that we must make sure is, which is not an advice, but which is a statement of reality today, that unfortunately we are not training students at school or undergraduate or postgraduate level to ask questions. That's a big serious problem. And this must start right from school and on. A 6-month-old toddler is the best researcher. Has innumerable questions to ask. No matter what you do, will not ask exploring things. And a scientist, a researcher needs to have that level of curiosity. And this we must promote and encourage. That is a part of any teaching program. Unfortunately, today, things have gone on the reverse gear on this side, that we are making them more on information savvy, techie savvy, but not knowledge savvy. But having joined research, I think first thing that I would ask my students to is ask question. What do you want to do? I do not give them problem that, okay, do work on this, on this. They have general idea. I have my interests. I ask them to look at my interests and see what they want to do, what questions come to their mind. And then we walk together. We learn together. For example, when I took up Ayurvedic biology, I myself had not known about Ayurveda itself. I started learning. I got a student who had enthusiastic, but knowledge-wise very, very limited. First 3 years, now she can tell back that how much rough treatment she would have sometimes received, because certain basic But then she was hardworking. And as I learn, as we experience, so we learn it together. And she did such a, and that's what I tell every student, that they must learn to do things themselves. As a mentor, it's not a one-way direction of information transfer. I also learn in the process. And as long as we keep that spirit, the output becomes better. For Ayurvedic people who want to get into research, yes, on one hand, especially those who are trained in Ayurveda, for them, of course, their primary objective is that they want to treat their subject, their patients, and use the knowledge that they want. But then they must also involve in research. They must not accept what is stated in books as the ultimate fact. In fact, I hope they remember what they would have learned from Charak and Shushruta, both of whom said, and many others said, that going to the books is the last resort. The first is your curiosity, your intuition, your understanding, and what other experts say. Books are not to be taken as the final, but unfortunately, that's what has happened. And I think anybody who wants to do research in Ayurveda must start with this assumption, this question, open mind, that maybe book is wrong, what is given in the Rome. I would start with that question: is something that is given in Charak's book or any other treatise, is it really right? Not that I want to prove it right or I want to prove it wrong, but is it right? Can we work? So only when we start with an open mind, that my answers can be this way or that way, or even in the middle, partly right, partly wrong, whatever it is, we must be ready to accept that. And of course, interdisciplinary. I cannot do research in Ayurveda as such, because I need somebody who knows the philosophy, somebody who knows the treatment schedules and so on and so forth. And they do not know biology. And that's where we can do, but not just biology. We need people who do material science, people who do plant science, people who do immunology, people who do, instrumentation. Today's instrumentation is very complex. I cannot handle myself every instrumentation. Computers are important. So we really need a complex mix of interdisciplinary approach, and student must be ready to accept that white canvas to work on. That's I would make my comments initially on this issue.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Dr. Patwardhan.
Yeah. I don't have much to say after having listened to Lakhotia said. This is exactly what I too have been arguing, that yes, questioning attitude is something that is lacking, especially in Ayurvedic scenario context. We don't encourage students to ask questions. I usually, again, see, I was also not trained well in research during my training. The training that I received was not of very high quality. I kept evolving and I kept studying, and my views kept changing, and even now they keep changing, and that is how I think one grows. And I advise my students that you don't stick to a particular viewpoint. You be ready to challenge yourself and ask questions and talk to people, so that read and understand others viewpoints. I encourage them, rather than more than teaching them. I encourage them to explore things for themselves, be proactive and seek collaborations. I can guide them to this person, go to this person, write an email to this person. So this is how I do, and they ultimately end up with good. I mean, this is what I assume, that they are ultimately satisfied when they complete their post graduation course or whatever. So this is what I keep telling them, that don't stick to a particular viewpoint. Be ready to change. Be ready to accept the challenges, and don't hesitate to say that yes, I was wrong, because this is what I have also been going through. Sometimes I realize that what I wrote maybe 20 years ago doesn't make sense now. I tell my students that don't read my book. It is it is not a good book to be referred to now. This is because now I think most of the things have become redundant, and that needs upgradation or updation. So owning up one's own mistakes and accepting that yes, I was wrong and what I wrote might have been wrong. See, that is what makes things more easy. This is what I have experienced. And this is what I teach my students also.
Okay, Megha, I may just make one more that as a mentor, there is a good saying that friend, philosopher, and guide. It starts with friend. So mentor has to be a friend, not just superior boss. It has to be a friend, philosopher, who can tell student, make them understand the deeper meanings of life and the deep meanings of learning knowledge, and then of course a guide. But again, guide doesn't handhold and take you to the destination. There is a doha in Hindi, Guru Govind do khade kaake lagu paye, balihari Guru aapki Govindiyo bataye. So Guru doesn't take you to the God. Guru only shows you the path. And that's what a mentor should be. That we start with friendship. Friends can fight. Friends can argue. That's what friends are. And that's what a supervisor of a student should be. That they should have freedom to argue. I'm very lucky to remember that my PhD supervisor was very young and very bright, but always told me that, look, in science, we have no seniority and juniority. We are equals, peers. And he encouraged me to say, sir, you are wrong. And I think that is a philosophy that we try to practice.
Yes, nice thoughts. Vishnu, any questions that we have left?
No, Megha, nothing. And it was such a very beautiful discussion. And the very important take-home message is science is very dynamic, and knowledge is also, in that sense, it's dynamic. So if in 20 years, if something like non-coding RNA can change like this, so suddenly we have a lot of things that we need to really understand the dynamic nature of all this knowledge. So I think that's one of the very important take-home message. So I mean, we don't have any questions from the audience side, Megha. So I think maybe we can. The scheduled time is also over. So
yes, I think we'll wrap up, and we look forward to having both Professor Lakhotia and Professor Patwardhan on our campus now that the pandemic is over.
One more point that I may say is that, you see, if, let's say, as a researcher, we find something and where we say, okay, this is what is stated in the classical treatise was not correct. It's not an insult to those great philosophers, great teachers who started that, because, see, knowledge has to change. Understanding has to change. And that's where saying that, okay, this was wrong doesn't mean an insult. It's that unless they had created that basis, we wouldn't have come to this stage where we are. And so therefore, we must be ready to accept criticism. And as Professor Patwardhan said, even I may have been wrong 5 years ago, because things change, understanding change. And this is what we must appreciate and understand. And once we do, and if students learn this point, that to be able to appreciate one's own mistakes, one's own misunderstandings, things will be very different in their own lives, as part of philosophy as well.
And I hope you'll be able to come and tell that to our students in person, sir.
Anytime.
In fact, we would be very much looking forward to having both of you here and to do the kind of jugalbandi we're doing in our integrated immunology class right now, because we find that our students really enjoy having the two perspectives and doing them side by side rather than doing one all alone and one after the other. So we're really looking forward to having people from the community come out and share these ideas together.
Please keep that spirit of openness. That's
Certainly.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Patwardhan, Professor Lakhotia.
I enjoyed a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very
all the
much.
best to all of you and
Thank
to
you.
the students, that I'm sure they will turn out to be different.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody in the audience.